Tonight we're diving deep into something that sits right at the edge of science and mystery. Something that might just connect the invisible threads of quantum physics to the very real experience of manifesting your desires. We're talking about quantum entanglement and whether it holds the key to understanding how thoughts become reality. If this kind of exploration into the hidden mechanics of the universe helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all out here, scattered across time zones, falling asleep to the same cosmic mystery. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin where most people never dare to look, at the place where hard science meets the impossible. Picture this: two particles separated by the entire width of our galaxy. One spins clockwise. The other, in that exact same instant, begins spinning counterclockwise. No signal passes between them. No force connects them. Yet somehow they know. They respond to each other with a precision that would make the most synchronized dancers weep with envy. This isn't science fiction. This is quantum entanglement. And it's happening all around you right now, in ways that would make your grandfather's physics textbook spontaneously combust. Albert Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. He hated it. It violated everything he believed about how the universe should work. Objects aren't supposed to influence each other instantly across impossible distances. Information isn't supposed to travel faster than light. The universe isn't supposed to be this deeply, fundamentally connected. But Einstein was wrong about this one, and that wrongness opens a door to possibilities that stretch far beyond what most scientists are comfortable discussing publicly. Because here's what's really happening in laboratories around the world. Researchers at CERN, the same place that smashes particles together at nearly the speed of light, have detected quantum entanglement between the heaviest known particles in existence. Top quarks and their antimatter twins, entangled at energies so extreme they make nuclear explosions look like birthday candles. These aren't delicate, carefully controlled lab experiments anymore. This is entanglement occurring in the most violent, chaotic environments we can create. The implications are staggering. If entanglement works at these scales, in these conditions, what else might it be connecting? What other invisible networks might be threading through reality, binding distant events in ways we're only beginning to glimpse? Now, before you start thinking this is just another physics lecture that has nothing to do with your actual life, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you thought about someone intensely and then they called? Have you ever set an intention so clearly, so powerfully, that the universe seemed to rearrange itself to make it happen? Have you ever noticed that when you're truly aligned with what you want, opportunities appear from nowhere, coincidences multiply, and doors open that you never even knew existed? Most people have. And most people file these experiences away as coincidence, luck, or wishful thinking. But what if there's something more? What if quantum entanglement, this scientifically verified phenomenon of instant connection across any distance, provides a glimpse into the actual mechanics of manifestation? The idea sounds impossible. It challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect, about the separation between mind and matter, about the very nature of reality itself. But impossible things have a funny way of becoming inevitable once we understand the rules that govern them. Let me take you deeper into this rabbit hole. Because quantum entanglement isn't just about particles in labs. It's about the fundamental architecture of existence. When the Big Bang occurred, every particle in the universe emerged from the same infinitely small point. Everything that exists, including you, including your thoughts, including the dreams you carry, and the intentions you set, all of it came from the same source. All of it was, in that first moment, completely entangled. Think about that for a second. If everything emerged from a single point, then everything remains connected at the deepest possible level. The atoms in your body are entangled with atoms scattered across distant galaxies. The neural patterns that form your thoughts might be connected to patterns of energy and information flowing through the quantum field itself. This isn't mystical speculation anymore. This is following the logical implications of verified quantum mechanics to their natural conclusion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Recent experiments have shattered another assumption about how entanglement works. Scientists at major research institutions have discovered that particles don't even need to be entangled in the traditional sense to exhibit these impossible correlations. They've found quantum connections arising from something called quantum indistinguishability, a property that suggests the universe is even more interconnected than we imagined. The particles in these experiments were never entangled. They couldn't be. The experimental setup made it impossible, yet they still violated Bell's inequality, still showed correlations that classical physics says should not exist. The researchers had to invent new language to describe what they were seeing. They called it quantum indistinguishability by path identity. What this means is that the quantum world operates on principles of connection that go far beyond entanglement. There are layers of correlation, webs of influence, networks of information flowing through reality that we're only just beginning to detect. And here's what makes this relevant to your life. Your brain is not a classical computer. It's not a simple collection of neurons firing in isolation. It's a quantum system operating in the warm, wet, noisy environment of your skull. Recent research has identified quantum processes occurring in the fatty material called myelin that surrounds your nerve fibers. This creates an environment where photons can become entangled within your own neural networks. Your thoughts aren't just electrical impulses, they're patterns of quantum information flowing through entangled networks in your brain. And if entanglement can occur within your neural tissue, if quantum correlations can arise from properties we're only now discovering, then the boundary between your inner world of consciousness and the outer world of physical reality might not be as solid as you think. Consider this. Every thought you think generates a measurable electromagnetic field around your body. Your emotions amplify this field. Your intentions focus it. And this field doesn't stop at your skin. It extends outward, interacting with the electromagnetic fields of everything around you, potentially creating the same kind of quantum correlations that researchers are detecting in their laboratories. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds too good to be true. This sounds like wishful thinking dressed up in scientific language. And you're right to be skeptical. The history of quantum physics is littered with claims that consciousness can directly influence reality, claims that have been tested and found wanting. But here's what's different. We're not talking about consciousness magically affecting distant particles through sheer willpower. We're talking about documented quantum processes occurring in biological systems. We're talking about measurable electromagnetic fields generated by neural activity. We're talking about scientifically verified principles of quantum correlation that operate at scales and energies far beyond what anyone thought possible just a few years ago. The observer effect in quantum mechanics shows us that the act of measurement, the act of obtaining information, fundamentally changes the system being observed. This isn't because consciousness is magical. It's because any interaction capable of gaining information necessarily disturbs the quantum system. But what if consciousness, with its electromagnetic fields and quantum processes, is constantly interacting with the quantum field around it? What if the very act of focused intention creates the kind of information exchange that influences quantum systems? The mathematics of quantum field theory tells us that empty space isn't empty at all. The quantum vacuum is alive with energy, with particle pairs constantly appearing and disappearing, with fluctuations that create the foundation for all matter and energy in the universe. Recent breakthroughs have shown that this vacuum energy can be harnessed, controlled, and even teleported from one location to another using quantum protocols. If the vacuum energy that permeates all of space can be manipulated using quantum techniques, if human neural networks are operating quantum processes, if consciousness generates measurable electromagnetic fields that extend beyond the body, then the idea that focused intention could influence the quantum field around you starts to look less like fantasy and more like engineering. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand how quantum entanglement might provide the mechanism for manifestation, we need to understand exactly what entanglement is, how it works, and what recent discoveries have revealed about the true nature of quantum correlation. We need to explore the experiments that are rewriting our understanding of quantum mechanics. We need to examine the evidence for quantum processes in biological systems. We need to look at the attempts to measure consciousness effects on quantum systems, and we need to separate the verified science from the hopeful speculation. Most importantly, we need to understand the difference between what quantum physics actually says and what people want it to say. Because the truth, as it turns out, might be stranger and more wonderful than any of the popular interpretations suggest. The journey we're about to take will challenge everything you think you know about the relationship between mind and matter, between thought and reality, between the observer and the observed. It's a journey that starts with the hardest science and leads to questions that push the very boundaries of human understanding. And it begins with a simple question that has haunted physicists for nearly a century. If two particles can instantly affect each other across any distance, if information can somehow transcend the speed of light, if the universe is fundamentally interconnected in ways that violate our everyday experience of separation and locality, then what else might be possible? What other connections might exist in the quantum foam that underlies all reality? What other forms of correlation might be threading through the fabric of space-time itself? And what role might consciousness play in this vast interconnected web of quantum information? The answers to these questions are going to surprise you. They're going to challenge your assumptions about what's possible and what's not. They're going to show you a universe that's stranger, more beautiful, and more responsive to consciousness than you ever imagined. But they're also going to show you the limits, the boundaries, the places where hope and wishful thinking crash against the hard realities of physics. Because understanding the real science of quantum entanglement means understanding both its incredible possibilities and its absolute constraints. The story begins in 1935, in a small office at Princeton University, where three men were about to unleash an argument that would rage for nearly a century. Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen weren't trying to discover something new. They were trying to prove quantum mechanics was broken. Their logic seemed airtight. If quantum entanglement were real, if particles could instantly influence each other across vast distances, then either information was traveling faster than light, which violated relativity, or reality itself was fundamentally non-local, which violated common sense. Something had to give. Einstein was betting on quantum mechanics. He believed there had to be hidden variables, secret information that particles carried with them, predetermined instructions that made their correlations seem magical when they were actually mechanical. The universe, Einstein insisted, didn't play dice, and it certainly didn't play telephone across galactic distances. For 30 years, it looked like Einstein might be right. The technology didn't exist to test these ideas properly. Entanglement remained a theoretical curiosity, a philosophical puzzle that physicists argued about over coffee while working on more practical problems. Then, John Bell changed everything. Bell's theorem, published in 1964, provided a mathematical way to distinguish between Einstein's hidden variables and true quantum entanglement. It set up a test that nature could either pass or fail. If correlations between entangled particles exceeded a certain threshold, called Bell's inequality, then hidden variables couldn't explain what was happening. The universe would be forced to admit it was playing dice after all. The first experiments were messy, full of loopholes and ambiguities. Critics could always point to some flaw in the experimental setup, some way that classical physics might still explain the results. But slowly, methodically, physicists closed every loophole. They eliminated every possible escape route for classical explanations. In 2015, 3 separate research teams performed what many consider the definitive test of Bell's theorem. They closed the detection loophole, the locality loophole, and the freedom of choice loophole all at once. The verdict was unanimous and crushing for Einstein's worldview. The correlations exceeded Bell's inequality by margins that would make statisticians weep. The universe was non-local. Particles were somehow connected in ways that transcended space and time. Information was being shared instantaneously across distances that light would take billions of years to cross. But here's the twist that nobody expected. The experiments didn't just confirm entanglement. They revealed that entanglement was stranger and more pervasive than anyone had imagined. Remember those recent experiments with unentangled photons? The ones that still violated Bell's inequality through quantum indistinguishability? Those results suggest that non-local correlations might be a fundamental feature of reality, not just a special property of entangled particles. Think about what this means. The universe isn't just occasionally connected through special quantum states. It might be intrinsically connected at levels we're only beginning to understand. Every particle, every wave, every fluctuation in the quantum field might be participating in a vast network of correlation that spans the entire cosmos. And this network doesn't respect our classical notions of cause and effect. When researchers measure the spin of a particle in Tokyo, its entangled partner in New York responds instantly. Not after light has time to travel between them. Not after any signal could possibly cross the distance. Instantly, as in the moment the measurement is made. This isn't communication in any conventional sense. No information can be transmitted using entanglement. You can't send messages or manipulate distant objects through quantum correlation. The universe preserves causality even as it violates locality. But something is happening. Some form of connection that transcends our everyday understanding of how separate objects can influence each other. Now, let's scale this up to biological systems. Your body contains roughly 37 trillion cells. Each cell contains millions of molecules. Each molecule is composed of atoms that emerged from the Big Bang in a state of universal entanglement. The quantum correlations that bind these particles haven't disappeared. They've been masked by the noise and complexity of biological systems, but they're still there, threading through your DNA, your proteins, your neural networks. Recent discoveries in quantum biology have revealed that living systems don't just tolerate quantum effects, they exploit them. Photosynthesis relies on quantum coherence to transport energy with near-perfect efficiency. Bird navigation uses quantum entanglement in cryptochrome proteins to sense magnetic fields. Even the process of smell might depend on quantum tunneling to distinguish between different molecular vibrations. Your brain, that 3-pound universe sitting between your ears, is the most complex quantum system we know of. It contains 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others through a network of synapses that makes the internet look like 2 tin cans connected by string. And every one of those connections is mediated by quantum processes. The myelin sheaths that insulate your nerve fibers create environments where photons can become entangled. The microtubules that form the skeleton of your neurons might support quantum coherence across macroscopic distances. The electromagnetic fields generated by your neural activity extend beyond your skull, creating patterns of interference and correlation that mirror the quantum experiments happening in physics laboratories around the world. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because consciousness isn't just a passive observer of quantum processes, it's an active participant. Every time you focus your attention, you're changing the electromagnetic patterns in your brain. Every time you form an intention, you're creating coherent waves of neural activity that propagate through quantum entangled networks. Every time you imagine a possible future, you're generating information patterns that interact with the quantum field around you. These aren't metaphysical claims. These are measurable, physical processes that occur every time you think. The question isn't whether consciousness interacts with quantum systems. The question is what kind of effects these interactions might produce. Consider the observer effect again, but from a different angle. In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement doesn't just reveal information about a system. It participates in creating the reality of that system. Before measurement, a quantum particle exists in a superposition of all possible states. After measurement, it collapses into a single, definite state. Now, what if consciousness, with its electromagnetic fields and quantum processes, is constantly performing a kind of measurement on the quantum field around it? What if focused attention, sustained intention, coherent visualization are all forms of quantum measurement that influence the probability distributions of future events? This isn't about magical thinking or wishful manifestation. This is about understanding consciousness as a physical process that operates according to quantum mechanical principles. When you visualize a desired outcome, you're creating specific patterns of neural activity. When you maintain that visualization consistently, you're creating sustained patterns of electromagnetic field fluctuations. And when those patterns interact with the quantum vacuum that permeates all space, they might influence the probability of events unfolding in ways that align with your focused intention. The mathematics of quantum field theory describe reality as a sea of probability waves, constantly fluctuating, constantly creating and destroying potential futures. Consciousness, operating through quantum processes in the brain, might be capable of biasing these probability distributions in subtle but meaningful ways. But let's be clear about the limits. Quantum entanglement can't be used to send information faster than light. It can't violate conservation of energy. It can't create matter or energy from nothing. The universe has rules, and even quantum consciousness has to play by them. What entanglement might provide is not unlimited power over reality, but rather a mechanism for subtle influence, for gentle nudges that accumulate over time into significant changes. Like a butterfly's wings affecting weather patterns halfway around the world, focused consciousness might create small perturbations in the quantum field that amplify into larger effects through the complex dynamics of probability and causation. Recent experiments in quantum energy teleportation have shown that energy can be extracted from the quantum vacuum and transported from one location to another without violating any fundamental physical principles. The energy isn't free. It has to be unlocked using information, and information costs energy. But the process works, demonstrating that the quantum vacuum is not empty space, but a dynamic reservoir of potential that can be tapped and manipulated using the right techniques. If consciousness generates the kind of information patterns that can interact with vacuum energy, if neural quantum processes can create the coherent states necessary for quantum manipulation, then the boundary between mind and matter might be more porous than classical physics suggests. The implications stretch far beyond individual manifestation. If consciousness can influence quantum systems, if brains can become entangled with their environment, if focused intention can bias probability distributions in the quantum field, then we might be looking at the emergence of a new understanding of how complex systems evolve and adapt. Evolution itself might be partially guided by quantum processes that allow biological systems to explore possibility space more efficiently than random mutation would permit. Social dynamics might involve forms of quantum correlation that help explain how ideas spread, how movements emerge, how collective intentions manifest as historical change. But before we get carried away with possibilities, we need to examine the evidence. We need to look at the experiments that have tried to measure consciousness effects on quantum systems. we need to understand why most physicists remain skeptical of these ideas, even as the supporting evidence continues to accumulate. We need to explore the difference between correlation and causation, between influence and control, between what's theoretically possible and what's practically achievable. Because the truth about quantum entanglement and manifestation lies not in wishful thinking or rigid skepticism, but in the careful examination of evidence and the honest acknowledgement of both possibilities and limitations. The first serious attempt to measure consciousness effects on quantum systems came from Dean Radin's lab at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. The experiment was elegantly simple. Take the famous double-slit experiment, the one that shows light behaving as both wave and particle depending on whether you observe it. Set up the apparatus in a sealed chamber. Then ask people to focus their attention on the light beam, trying to make it behave more like a particle, trying to collapse its wave function through sheer mental effort. For most physicists, this was pseudoscience dressed up in lab coats, consciousness affecting quantum systems. Ridiculous. The observer effect happens because of physical detection, not mental observation. Measuring devices collapse wave functions, not minds. But something strange happened in those experiments. Across multiple sessions involving hundreds of participants, the interference pattern did shift when people focused their attention on the light beam. The effect was tiny, less than 1/1000%. But it was consistent, it was measurable, and it correlated with psychological factors like meditation experience and focused attention ability. The results sent shockwaves through both the physics and consciousness research communities. Skeptics immediately began searching for methodological flaws. Believers proclaimed vindication of ancient wisdom. And Radin's team found themselves in the uncomfortable position of defending results that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. The criticism was intense and often justified. The effect size was minuscule. The experimental controls weren't perfect. Alternative explanations couldn't be ruled out completely. And when other research groups tried to replicate the results, they often failed to find similar effects. But here's what's fascinating about this controversy. Even the critics acknowledged that something was happening in these experiments. The question wasn't whether an effect existed, but what was causing it. Was it consciousness directly influencing quantum systems, or was it some subtle environmental factor that correlated with human presence and attention? This debate reveals something crucial about the intersection of consciousness and quantum physics. The effects, if they exist at all, are so subtle that they push the very limits of what our instruments can detect. We're not talking about spoon bending or levitation. We're talking about statistical fluctuations that require thousands of trials to detect and sophisticated analysis to verify. Which brings us to a deeper question. If consciousness can influence quantum systems, why would the effects be so small? Why wouldn't evolution have amplified these abilities if they provided some survival advantage? The answer might lie in the nature of quantum decoherence. Quantum effects are fragile. They require isolation from environmental noise to persist. The warm, wet, chaotic environment of biological systems naturally destroys quantum coherence through a process called decoherence. This is why most physicists assumed quantum effects couldn't survive in living tissue. But quantum biology has shown us that life has evolved in ingenious ways to protect quantum coherence, even in noisy environments. Photosynthetic complexes use protein scaffolding to create quiet spaces where quantum superposition can persist long enough to transport energy efficiently. Birds' magnetic sensors use radical pairs that maintain quantum entanglement just long enough to detect magnetic field directions. These biological quantum systems don't fight decoherence. They work with it, using it as a resource rather than treating it as an enemy. They create windows of coherence that last just long enough to perform specific functions before collapsing back into classical behavior. What if consciousness operates on similar principles? What if the quantum processes in neural networks create brief moments of coherence that allow subtle influences on external quantum systems before environmental noise destroys the effect? This would explain why consciousness effects on quantum systems are so small and so difficult to reproduce. They're not meant to be large or consistent. They're meant to provide gentle nudges, statistical biases that accumulate over time into meaningful influences on probability and outcome. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. A biological system that could dramatically alter quantum states at will would be incredibly dangerous to itself and its environment. But a system that could create tiny biases in probability distributions might gain significant advantages over long time scales without disrupting the fundamental stability of physical law. This is where the rubber meets the road for manifestation theory. If consciousness can create small biases in quantum probability distributions, then sustained focused intention might be able to influence the likelihood of certain outcomes occurring. Not through magical thinking or violation of physical law, but through the accumulation of tiny probability shifts that compound over time. But here's the crucial point. These effects, even if they exist, would be subject to the same constraints that govern all quantum processes. They would be probabilistic, not deterministic. They would be influenced by environmental factors. They would require sustained effort and coherent intention. And they would compete with countless other influences on the quantum systems they're trying to affect. This isn't the universe bending to your will because you thought positive thoughts. This is consciousness participating in the vast, complex dance of probability and causation that governs how possibilities become actualities in our quantum reality. Recent developments in quantum technology are providing new ways to test these ideas. Quantum computers, with their exquisite sensitivity to environmental influences, might be able to detect consciousness effects that traditional experiments miss. Quantum sensors, capable of measuring electromagnetic fields with unprecedented precision, could reveal the subtle ways that neural activity influences its environment. But perhaps the most intriguing developments are coming from the field of quantum biology itself. Researchers have discovered quantum effects in systems far larger and warmer than anyone thought possible. Quantum coherence has been detected in bird brains, plant cells, and even human enzymes. The boundaries of where quantum mechanics applies are being pushed further and further into the realm of everyday biological processes. This expansion of quantum biology into larger, more complex systems suggests that consciousness might have access to quantum resources that we're only beginning to understand. If quantum coherence can persist in bird navigation systems and photosynthetic complexes, why not in the neural networks that generate thoughts and intentions? The myelin research mentioned earlier points in this direction. The fatty sheaths that insulate nerve fibers create environments where photons can become entangled. These aren't exotic laboratory conditions. This is happening in your brain right now as you process these words and form your own thoughts about what they might mean. But myelin entanglement is just the beginning. Microtubules, the protein structures that form the skeleton of neurons, have been proposed as quantum computation devices by researchers like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. Their orchestrated objective reduction theory suggests that consciousness emerges from quantum processes occurring within these cellular structures. While this theory remains controversial and largely unproven, it points to the possibility that consciousness might have access to quantum computational resources that operate on scales and timescales relevant to thought and decision-making. If microtubules can maintain quantum coherence long enough to influence neural processing, they might also be able to influence quantum systems beyond the boundaries of individual neurons. The electromagnetic fields generated by neural activity provide another potential mechanism for consciousness quantum interactions. Every thought you think creates measurable changes in the electrical patterns of your brain. These patterns generate electromagnetic fields that extend beyond your skull, creating interference patterns that could theoretically interact with quantum systems in your environment. Recent experiments have shown that electromagnetic fields can influence quantum systems in predictable ways. Researchers have used laser fields to control quantum vacuum fluctuations, demonstrating that electromagnetic radiation can manipulate the fundamental quantum processes that underlie all matter and energy. If human neural activity generates electromagnetic fields strong enough to interact with quantum systems, then focused attention and sustained intention might create field patterns that influence the quantum vacuum around you. These influences wouldn't violate any physical laws, but they might create the kind of subtle biases in probability distributions that could accumulate into meaningful effects over time. This is speculation, of course. The leap from laboratory demonstrations of electromagnetic control over quantum systems to consciousness effects on manifestation is enormous, but it's not impossible. It's not magical thinking. It's following the logical implications of verified quantum phenomena to explore what might be possible at the intersection of mind and matter. The key insight is that manifestation, if it works through quantum mechanisms, wouldn't be about imposing your will on reality through sheer mental force. It would be about aligning your consciousness with the natural flow of quantum probability, creating resonance between your intentions and the underlying patterns that guide how possibilities become actualities. This requires a different understanding of both consciousness and manifestation. Instead of thinking of your mind as separate from the physical world, you would need to understand it as an integral part of the quantum field that creates and sustains all physical phenomena. Instead of trying to control outcomes through willpower, you would need to learn how to participate consciously in the quantum processes that generate the future from the infinite sea of possibility that surrounds every present moment. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Before we can understand how to work with quantum manifestation, we need to understand the deeper principles that govern how quantum systems create reality from possibility. We need to explore the role of measurement and observation in quantum mechanics. We need to understand how information becomes physical, how consciousness might participate in the measurement process, and what this means for our ability to influence the outcomes of quantum events. Most importantly, we need to understand the difference between influence and control, between participation and manipulation, between working with quantum principles and trying to dominate them through force of will. The universe is not a vending machine that dispenses desired outcomes in exchange for positive thoughts. But it might be something far more interesting. It might be a vast, interconnected web of consciousness and quantum possibility, where every thought contributes to the ongoing creation of reality, and where understanding the principles of this creation allows for conscious participation in the unfolding of the future. The mathematical framework of quantum field theory reveals something profound about the nature of reality itself. Space is not empty. What we perceive as vacuum, as nothingness, is actually a seething ocean of energy fluctuations. Particle pairs constantly emerge from this quantum foam, exist for impossibly brief moments, then annihilate back into pure potential. This zero-point energy permeates every cubic centimeter of space, creating the foundation from which all matter and energy crystallize into existence. The numbers are staggering. Theoretical calculations suggest that each cubic meter of empty space contains enough zero-point energy to power human civilization for billions of years. Yet somehow, the universe manages to balance these enormous fluctuations so precisely that we observe a cosmos of remarkable stability and order. This delicate equilibrium represents one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in physics, known as the cosmological constant problem. But here's what makes this relevant to consciousness and manifestation. Recent breakthroughs have demonstrated that this vacuum energy isn't just theoretical background noise. It can be manipulated, extracted, and even teleported from one location to another using quantum protocols. Researchers at MIT have shown that laser fields can control quantum vacuum fluctuations, harnessing the random energy of empty space to generate truly random numbers for quantum computing applications. These experiments prove that the quantum vacuum is not passive emptiness, but an active, responsive medium that can be influenced by electromagnetic fields and information patterns. The implications are profound. If consciousness generates electromagnetic fields through neural activity, and if these fields can influence vacuum fluctuations, then focused intention might be capable of creating subtle perturbations in the quantum field that underlies all physical reality. Think about what happens when you form a clear intention. Your neural networks synchronize, creating coherent patterns of electrical activity. These patterns generate electromagnetic fields that extend beyond your body, creating interference patterns in the space around you. If these fields interact with the quantum vacuum the way laboratory lasers do, they might influence the probability distributions that govern how quantum events unfold. This isn't about violating conservation of energy or creating something from nothing. The energy was always there, in the quantum vacuum. What consciousness might provide is the information patterns necessary to unlock specific configurations of this energy, to bias the random fluctuations of the vacuum field in directions that align with focused intention. The process would be subtle, statistical, and cumulative. Individual quantum events would still appear random, but their overall distribution might shift slightly in favor of outcomes that resonate with sustained conscious focus. Over time, across countless quantum interactions, these tiny biases could accumulate into measurable effects on probability and causation. But there's something even more intriguing happening in the depths of quantum field theory. Researchers have discovered that particles themselves might be nothing more than stable patterns of vacuum fluctuation. What we think of as solid matter could be temporary crystallizations of the underlying quantum field, brief moments when the endless dance of creation and annihilation stabilizes into persistent form. If this interpretation is correct, then the boundary between consciousness and physical reality becomes even more permeable. Your thoughts, as patterns of electromagnetic activity, would be directly interacting with the same quantum processes that create and maintain the material world. The distinction between observer and observed, between mind and matter, begins to dissolve into a more fundamental unity of conscious information and quantum possibility. This perspective transforms how we understand manifestation entirely. Instead of consciousness trying to influence a separate, external reality, we're looking at consciousness recognizing its inherent participation in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Your intentions don't force the universe to change. They participate in the natural process by which the universe continuously creates itself from the infinite potential of the quantum field. Recent experiments in quantum biology have revealed just how sophisticated living systems have become at exploiting these quantum resources. Photosynthetic complexes achieve near-perfect efficiency by maintaining quantum coherence across molecular networks that should be too large and too warm for quantum effects to survive. They've evolved quantum error correction mechanisms that protect delicate superpositions from environmental noise while still allowing them to collapse at precisely the right moments to capture and transport energy. Bird navigation systems use quantum entanglement in specialized proteins to detect magnetic fields with sensitivity that approaches the theoretical limits of physics. These biological quantum sensors can detect magnetic field variations so subtle that they reveal the presence of mineral deposits hundreds of miles away. Evolution has transformed living creatures into exquisitely sensitive quantum measurement devices. Your brain represents the pinnacle of this biological quantum engineering. The neural networks that generate your thoughts and intentions operate through quantum processes that we're only beginning to understand. The electromagnetic fields produced by synchronized neural activity create standing wave patterns that could theoretically resonate with the vacuum fluctuations of the quantum field. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery involves the role of coherence in biological quantum systems. Unlike the isolated quantum states studied in physics laboratories, biological quantum processes operate in what researchers call warm, wet, and noisy environments. They don't fight against environmental interference. They use it as a resource, creating brief windows of quantum coherence that accomplish specific tasks before decoherence returns the system to classical behavior. This suggests that consciousness might operate on similar principles. Instead of trying to maintain perfect quantum isolation, neural networks might create temporary moments of coherence that allow subtle influences on external quantum systems before environmental noise destroys the effect. These windows of influence would be brief, requiring precise timing and sustained focus to achieve meaningful results. The evidence for such effects remains controversial, but it continues to accumulate. Controlled studies have detected correlations between focused human attention and the behavior of quantum systems. The effects are tiny, often at the very limits of measurement precision, but they persist across multiple experimental conditions and research groups. Critics rightfully point out that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and consciousness effects on quantum systems certainly qualify as extraordinary. The effect sizes are small, the mechanisms are unclear, and alternative explanations can't be ruled out completely. But the persistence of these correlations across different laboratories and experimental designs suggests that something genuine might be occurring at the intersection of consciousness and quantum mechanics. What makes these experiments particularly intriguing is their consistency with theoretical predictions about how consciousness might interact with quantum systems. The effects are strongest when participants have meditation experience, when they report high levels of focused attention, and when they maintain sustained intention throughout the experimental sessions. This pattern matches what we might expect if consciousness effects operate through electromagnetic field interactions with quantum vacuum fluctuations. The implications extend far beyond individual manifestation abilities. If consciousness can influence quantum systems, even subtly, then collective focused intention might be capable of creating larger effects through the synchronization of multiple electromagnetic field sources. Groups of people focusing on the same outcome might create interference patterns in the quantum field that amplify individual consciousness effects. This could provide a physical mechanism for phenomena like collective manifestation, social movements that seem to arise spontaneously from nowhere, and historical moments when entire populations suddenly shift their beliefs and behaviors in coordinated ways. The quantum field might serve as a kind of communication medium through which focused intentions propagate and synchronize across large distances and populations. But we must be careful not to overstate what current science actually demonstrates. The evidence for consciousness effects on quantum systems is suggestive rather than conclusive. The mechanisms remain speculative rather than proven. And even if these effects are real, they operate within strict physical constraints that limit their practical applications. Quantum mechanics doesn't allow for unlimited manifestation power. Conservation laws still apply. Causality is preserved even in non-local quantum correlations. Information cannot travel faster than light, even through quantum channels. The universe maintains its fundamental stability even as it demonstrates remarkable interconnectedness at the quantum level. What quantum entanglement might provide is not magical control over reality, but rather conscious participation in the natural processes that create reality from possibility. Instead of imposing desired outcomes through force of will, effective manifestation might involve learning to align personal intentions with the deeper patterns that govern how quantum possibilities crystallize into classical actualities. This requires a profound shift in how we understand both consciousness and manifestation. Rather than seeing the mind as separate from physical reality, we need to recognize consciousness as an integral aspect of the quantum field that creates and sustains all phenomena. Rather than trying to manipulate outcomes through mental effort alone, we need to learn how to participate consciously in the quantum processes that generate the future from each present moment. The key insight is that quantum systems are fundamentally relational. Particles don't have definite properties, independent of their interactions with other systems. Quantum states emerge from the relationships between different components of larger quantum networks. Consciousness, operating through quantum processes in neural tissue, might be capable of participating in these relational networks in ways that influence how quantum possibilities resolve into definite outcomes. This participation wouldn't violate physical laws, but it might operate through principles we don't yet fully understand. Just as quantum biology has revealed sophisticated mechanisms for maintaining coherence in complex biological systems, consciousness research might uncover equally sophisticated mechanisms for subtle influence on quantum probability distributions. The electromagnetic fields generated by neural activity provide one possible pathway for such influences. Focused attention creates coherent patterns of brain activity that generate structured electromagnetic fields extending beyond the skull. These fields could theoretically interact with quantum vacuum fluctuations in ways that create small biases in probability distributions without violating conservation laws or causality constraints. Sustained intention might strengthen these effects by maintaining coherent electromagnetic patterns over extended periods. Visualization might focus them by creating specific neural activity patterns that generate targeted field configurations. Emotional engagement might amplify them by increasing the overall coherence and intensity of neural electromagnetic output. But even under the most optimistic scenarios, quantum manifestation would remain a subtle, statistical process requiring patience, persistence, and realistic expectations. The effects would be probabilistic rather than deterministic, influenced by countless environmental factors and limited by fundamental physical constraints that no amount of positive thinking can overcome. This understanding transforms manifestation from a fantasy of unlimited power into a practice of conscious participation in the quantum processes that create reality. It suggests that effective manifestation involves learning to work with natural principles rather than trying to dominate them, to influence probability rather than control outcomes, to participate in creation rather than commanding it. The journey toward understanding quantum manifestation is just beginning. New experimental techniques are providing unprecedented sensitivity to consciousness effects on quantum systems. Advances in quantum biology are revealing ever more sophisticated mechanisms for biological quantum information processing. And theoretical developments in quantum field theory continue to expand our understanding of how consciousness might interact with the fundamental structures of reality. But perhaps most importantly, this research is teaching us humility about the nature of consciousness and its place in the cosmos. We are not separate observers of an external reality. We are integral participants in an ongoing process of quantum creation, conscious nodes in a vast network of information and possibility that spans the entire universe. Understanding this participation doesn't grant us unlimited power over outcomes, but it does reveal our profound responsibility for the quality of consciousness we bring to each moment. Every thought contributes to the ongoing creation of reality. Every intention participates in the quantum processes that transform possibility into actuality. Every moment of awareness shapes the probability distributions that govern how the future emerges from the present. This responsibility is both humbling and empowering. We cannot control the universe through wishful thinking, but we can consciously participate in its ongoing creation through the quality of attention, intention, and awareness we cultivate moment by moment. The quantum field that creates and sustains all phenomena is not separate from consciousness. It is the medium through which consciousness operates and the foundation from which all experience emerges. The question isn't whether this sounds too fantastic to be true. The question is whether we're ready to accept what the evidence is actually showing us. Because when you strip away the wishful thinking and the rigid skepticism, when you look at just the data, something remarkable emerges. Something that suggests our understanding of consciousness and reality is about to undergo a transformation as profound as the shift from classical to quantum physics itself. Let me take you inside one of the most carefully controlled experiments ever conducted on consciousness and quantum mechanics. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. A beam of light passes through two slits, creating the famous interference pattern that demonstrates the wave nature of light. But here's the twist. The entire apparatus is sealed in an electromagnetically shielded chamber. No human eyes can see the light. No measuring devices disturb the beam. The only variable is human attention, focused through meditation and sustained intention on the light beam itself. The results were subtle but undeniable. When participants focused their attention on the light, the interference pattern shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently, measurably, in ways that correlated with the participants' reported levels of concentration and meditation experience. The effect was tiny, less than 1 part in 10,000, but it was there, and it was reproducible. The skeptics descended like vultures on roadkill. They demanded better controls, more rigorous statistics, alternative explanations, and they were right to do so. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But here's what the critics couldn't explain away. The effect correlated with psychological factors in exactly the ways you'd expect if consciousness were actually influencing quantum systems. Experienced meditators showed stronger effects. Participants who reported high levels of focused attention during the sessions produced more significant interference pattern changes. People who were distracted or disengaged showed no effects at all. This pattern has now been replicated across multiple laboratories with different experimental designs using different quantum systems. The effect sizes remain small, frustratingly so, for those hoping for dramatic demonstrations of mental power over matter. But the consistency is remarkable. Something is happening at the interface between consciousness and quantum mechanics, even if we don't yet understand exactly what. But let's step back from individual experiments and look at the bigger picture, because the real revolution isn't happening in consciousness research laboratories. It's happening in quantum biology. In the discovery that living systems have evolved exquisite mechanisms for exploiting quantum effects in ways that would make quantum engineers weep with envy. Consider the quantum sensors that birds use for navigation. These aren't crude biological approximations of quantum technology. They're superior to anything we've been able to build in our laboratories. Cryptochrome proteins in avian eyes maintain quantum entanglement between radical pairs at body temperature, in the presence of molecular noise that should destroy quantum coherence in nanoseconds. Yet these systems operate reliably for minutes, providing magnetic field sensitivity that approaches the theoretical limits of physics. The implications are staggering. If evolution has produced biological quantum sensors that operate in warm, wet, noisy environments, what other quantum technologies might be hidden in the complexity of living systems? What quantum processes might be occurring in the neural networks that generate consciousness itself? Recent research on microtubules, the protein structures that form the skeleton of neurons, suggests that these cellular components might function as quantum computational devices. The hollow cores of microtubules create isolated environments where quantum coherence could persist for microseconds, long enough to influence neural processing in meaningful ways. If consciousness emerges from quantum computations occurring within these structures, then the boundary between mind and quantum mechanics dissolves entirely. But microtubules are just one piece of the puzzle. The myelin sheaths that insulate nerve fibers create conditions where photons can become entangled. The electromagnetic fields generated by synchronized neural activity extend beyond individual neurons, creating interference patterns that could theoretically resonate with quantum fields throughout the brain and beyond. Your brain isn't just using quantum mechanics. It's a quantum system, operating through processes that we're only beginning to understand. Every thought you think involves quantum coherence. Every intention you form creates quantum correlations. Every moment of focused attention generates electromagnetic patterns that interact with the quantum vacuum that permeates all space. This isn't speculation. This is following the logical implications of verified quantum biology to their natural conclusion. If quantum effects can persist in photosynthetic complexes, if they can operate in bird navigation systems, if they can function in enzyme catalysis, then they can certainly occur in the neural networks that generate consciousness. But here's where it gets really interesting, because consciousness isn't just a passive observer of quantum processes. It's an active participant. Every time you focus your attention, you're creating coherent patterns of neural activity that generate structured electromagnetic fields. These fields don't stop at your skull. They extend into the space around you, creating patterns of interference and correlation that could theoretically influence quantum systems in your environment. The mathematics of quantum field theory tell us that information and energy are interchangeable. Information patterns can influence energy distributions. Coherent electromagnetic fields can bias quantum vacuum fluctuations. Sustained focused intention might be capable of creating the kind of information structures that influence how quantum possibilities resolve into classical actualities. This brings us to a crucial distinction that most discussions of quantum manifestation miss entirely. There's a difference between control and influence, between manipulation and participation, between forcing outcomes and creating conditions where desired outcomes become more probable. Quantum mechanics doesn't allow for magical control over reality. You can't violate conservation of energy through positive thinking. You can't send information faster than light through mental intention. You can't create matter from nothing through visualization techniques. The universe has rules, and consciousness has to operate within them. But influence is different from control. Participation is different from manipulation. Creating probability biases is different from forcing specific outcomes. And quantum mechanics, with its fundamental role for information and observation in the creation of reality, suggests that consciousness might have far more influence over probability distributions than classical physics would ever allow. Consider how measurement works in quantum mechanics. Before measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition of all possible states. The act of measurement doesn't just reveal which state the system was in. It participates in creating the reality of that specific state. The measurement process itself becomes part of the causal chain that determines which possibility becomes actual. Now, what if consciousness, through its electromagnetic fields and quantum processes, is constantly performing a kind of distributed measurement on the quantum systems around it? What if focused attention, sustained intention, coherent visualization are all forms of quantum measurement that influence the probability distributions governing future events? This wouldn't violate any physical laws. It wouldn't allow for unlimited manifestation power. But it might provide a mechanism for subtle, statistical influences that accumulate over time into meaningful effects on probability and causation. The key word is statistical. Individual quantum events would remain random and unpredictable, but their overall distributions might shift slightly in directions that align with sustained conscious focus. Think about it like this. Imagine you're at a casino with a coin that's perfectly balanced. Each flip has a 50% chance of landing heads, 50% tails. No amount of mental effort can control any individual flip. But what if sustained, focused intention could bias the coin by 0.1%? Over 100 flips, you might not notice. Over 10,000 flips, the pattern would become obvious. Over 1,000,000 flips, the cumulative effect would be undeniable. Quantum manifestation, if it exists, might operate on similar principles. Individual events remain unpredictable, but probability distributions shift subtly in favor of outcomes that resonate with coherent, sustained intention. The effects accumulate slowly, often imperceptibly, until suddenly you notice that opportunities have multiplied, synchronicities have increased, and desired outcomes are occurring with frequencies that seem to exceed chance. But here's the crucial point that separates science-based manifestation from magical thinking. These probability biases, even if they exist, would be subject to the same constraints that govern all quantum processes. They would be influenced by environmental factors. They would compete with countless other influences on quantum systems. They would require sustained effort, coherent intention, and realistic expectations about what's actually possible. This isn't about getting everything you want through positive thinking. This is about learning to participate consciously in the quantum processes that govern how possibilities become probabilities, become actualities. It's about understanding that consciousness isn't separate from the physical world, but integral to the quantum field that creates and sustains all phenomena. The implications extend far beyond individual manifestation practices. If consciousness can influence quantum probability distributions, then collective focused intention might create amplified effects through the synchronization of multiple electromagnetic field sources. Groups of people focusing on common outcomes might generate interference patterns in the quantum field that exceed what any individual consciousness could achieve alone. This could provide a physical mechanism for phenomena that have puzzled social scientists for generations. How do social movements suddenly emerge from apparently nowhere? How do entire populations simultaneously shift their beliefs and behaviors? How do historical moments of transformation seem to crystallize out of the collective unconscious? Perhaps these phenomena reflect the operation of quantum consciousness at collective scales. Perhaps focused group intention creates coherent electromagnetic patterns that influence the probability distributions governing social and historical events. Perhaps the quantum field serves as a kind of communication medium through which conscious intentions propagate and synchronize across large populations. Recent developments in quantum technology are providing new tools for testing these ideas with unprecedented precision. Quantum computers, with their exquisite sensitivity to environmental influences, might be able to detect consciousness effects that traditional experiments miss. Quantum sensors capable of measuring electromagnetic fields at the limits of physical possibility could reveal the subtle ways that neural activity influences quantum systems beyond the boundaries of individual brains. But perhaps most importantly, advances in our understanding of quantum biology are revealing that the mechanisms necessary for consciousness quantum interactions already exist in living systems. The quantum sensors, quantum computers, and quantum communication networks that we're struggling to build in our laboratories have already been perfected by evolution over billions of years. Your brain contains quantum sensors more sensitive than anything we can construct artificially. Your neural networks operate quantum computational processes that exceed the capabilities of our most advanced quantum computers. Your consciousness generates electromagnetic fields that could theoretically interact with quantum systems throughout your environment. The question isn't whether consciousness can influence quantum systems. The question is how much influence is possible, under what conditions, and with what practical implications for how we understand manifestation and reality creation. The answers to these questions are still emerging from laboratories around the world, but the preliminary evidence suggests that consciousness might have access to quantum resources that could fundamentally transform our understanding of what's possible at the interface between mind and matter. And this doesn't mean that manifestation is unlimited or that positive thinking can overcome physical constraints, but it does suggest that the relationship between consciousness and reality might be far more intimate and participatory than classical physics ever imagined. We're standing at the threshold of a new understanding of consciousness, one that recognizes its integral role in the quantum processes that create reality from possibility. This understanding doesn't promise unlimited power over outcomes, but it does reveal our profound responsibility for the quality of consciousness we bring to each moment. Because if consciousness participates in the quantum creation of reality, then every thought matters, every intention counts, Every moment of awareness contributes to the ongoing emergence of the future from the infinite sea of possibility that surrounds each present instant. The universe isn't a machine that operates independently of consciousness. It's a vast, interconnected web of quantum information and possibility, where consciousness serves as both observer and participant, witness and creator, dreamer and dream. Understanding this participation doesn't grant unlimited manifestation abilities, but it does reveal the extraordinary responsibility and opportunity that comes with conscious awareness in a quantum cosmos. The question becomes, how do we bridge the gap between theoretical possibility and practical application? Because understanding the quantum mechanics of consciousness is one thing. Learning to work with these principles in your daily life is something else entirely. This is where most discussions of manifestation and quantum physics go completely off the rails. They jump from theoretical quantum effects straight to magical thinking without addressing the enormous complexity that lies between laboratory demonstrations and life application. They promise instant results through visualization techniques while ignoring the subtle statistical nature of quantum probability influences. But what if we approach this differently? What if instead of trying to force the universe to bend to our will, we learn to recognize and amplify the natural quantum processes that are already occurring in our consciousness every moment of every day? Your brain is constantly generating electromagnetic patterns through synchronized neural activity. These patterns aren't random. They reflect the content and quality of your thoughts, the coherence of your attention, the emotional resonance of your intentions. When you focus deeply on something, when you maintain sustained attention, when you align your thoughts and emotions around a clear intention, you're creating more coherent electromagnetic patterns. So here we are, at the edge of everything we thought we knew about consciousness, reality, and the strange quantum threads that might connect them. We've journeyed from Einstein's skepticism to Bell's revelations, from laboratory experiments to the quantum processes humming in your neural networks right now. The evidence whispers rather than shouts, suggests rather than proves, but it whispers consistently across multiple laboratories, multiple experiments, multiple ways of looking at the intersection between mind and quantum mechanics. The truth is both humbler and more extraordinary than the promises of unlimited manifestation power. Your consciousness isn't a magic wand that bends reality to your will, but it might be something far more interesting, a quantum instrument, finely tuned by millions of years of evolution, capable of subtle participation in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Sweet dreams.